Thank you. All right, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Municipal Audit Committee. We are noticed today from 1 to 2 p.m. If we can go ahead and do a roll call, please, Madam Clerk.
Yes. Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Ms. Allard? Ms. LaFrance?
Here.
Ms. Domboski? Mr. Frisk?
Here.
And Ms. Morrison?
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, so we have a couple items on our agenda today. First, we have an update from BDO on the FY 2021 audit, and then after that, we will go over Internal Audit Report 2022-01 from Internal Audit. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to BDO.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And my name's Joy Mariner. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. You should have received just kind of report to the audit committee as a planning communication, just to discuss what our plan is for the audit of the 2021 financial statements. And that's included as an attachment to the meeting. Basically, what I want to just go through is just an overview of our plan. We're just getting started on your 2021 audit. It's already at the middle of February, and we've been over there downtown working on the audit already for a couple of weeks. Things are going really well. And you know, when we look at kind of the scope of the audit and our responsibilities, so we're responsible for forming an opinion on the financial statements. We also look at your federal single audit, which is your federal schedule of awards and your state schedule of awards. And we follow lots of different standards. So these are kind of listed here. But, you know, maybe overarching to that whole concept is the idea that we do work for you as the assembly and the audit committee. And we're required to follow professional standards, and we also work very closely with your management team there, with Molly and her team in accounting and Travis and some of the other departments that feed information into your financial statements. But ultimately, we do work for you, and it's really important for you to, you know, for you to have access to us and to feel comfortable letting us know if there's areas that you would like us to focus on. But our responsibility overall is to form and express an opinion on the financial statements. So what's our strategy?
Before you go on, Ms. Mariner, I just want to note for the record that we've been joined by Ms. Domboski. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. Also, we do have just an overall strategy. So how we go about doing your audit is really, it's not a small audit. Your audit is comprised of lots of different areas. And one of the things that we're required under professional standards to do is assess risk, to identify areas that may be riskier to the financial statements, things that could have been recorded incorrectly or reported incorrectly in the financial statements, and then to perform procedures to make sure those risks are addressed. So we do that risk assessment process by looking at last year's results. We also look at just inherently what's risky with the municipality, within the municipality, such as the turnover in administration. There may have been changes in the way processes or procedures were done. I'm looking for just generally how the industry has changed or what types of regulations may have changed for you this year. This is especially true in the area of some of the grants that have been flowing through as it relates to COVID. New accounting standards that need to be implemented or new financial reporting guidance. We look at changes in your estimates, your controls, and your IT systems. And then always looking at our own materiality, which materiality is just the level at which someone could read the financial statements and be misled. And so the materiality level, or the amount that things might be misstated and still be misleading, really depends on the fund that we're looking at or the type of activity. For example, if we were to find some sort of fraud that is even a small or negligible amount, that would be material to us because fraud is just inherently material. But if we find something that is an error that's not a big number and it really has no impact, ultimately it's a classification issue or a timing difference, that might be something that falls under the radar of what we would need to worry about in terms of the audit. terms of plan scope, a few things to bring into play here to discuss with you. We do look at fraud risk and specifically management override of controls. So if a procedure is designed to be run through a control system this way, this PO gets approved, the purchase is made, the invoice is entered, it gets approved here and paid. We are then looking for any time that regular process is overridden. Somebody's coming in and booking a journal entry outside of that main process, or it's an unusual type of transaction that occurred during the year. We also look pretty closely at revenue recognition because the way that revenues are recognized is really important at any company, but also at governments, and specifically looking for things that might be recorded incorrectly related to revenue in the wrong period, or maybe if an expenditure is being classified into the revenue account. That's something that we would look at pretty carefully. And so we do perform some tests related to revenue specifically to address that risk. Otherwise, this is a kind of a big part of what I want to talk about with you, just already the things that we have identified that we are working on as it relates to your audit. So you did have some changes in your bond rating and debt this year. So we're going to be looking at your bond refunding, but also debt covenants to make sure that there's still no issues related to compliance with your debt covenants this year. Last year, when we talked about the financial reports and the compliance reports, there were some concerns about how FEMA revenue was being recognized because the way FEMA is a very complicated animal in a lot of respects, but from an accounting perspective, you record FEMA revenue when you've received the obligation from FEMA, not necessarily when you've received the cash or even invoiced them. So as long as the expense has been incurred and FEMA has obligated the funds, you would record the revenue. And so your team spent a lot of effort getting that all cleaned up. But we will be looking at how that's recognized, and also to make sure that there is an obligation that exists, that FEMA has made the commitment to cover that cost before it is recorded in a FEMA related revenue account or revenue fund, special revenue fund. And so that's an area that we are looking at just because we know the numbers are big and we know it was an issue last year. We're also looking at interfund loans. This is something that we look at every year, but there are some interfund balances that were growing last year, just to make sure we understand the terms of those interfund loans and the nature of how they are anticipated to be repaid. Also here as a bullet point, we do have a new standalone audit. In the past, you've not had a standalone audit for solid waste or refuse and disposal. There's two sides of solid waste. That will be getting audited this year separately so that you can issue revenue bonds associated with those funds. So that'll be an additional service that we're providing this year. But then MLMP closed out last year, so there may be some final closeout entries, but there will not be a separate audit of MLMP. We also have an item here for ARPA funds because there's a lot going on with ARPA and the guidance is coming out rather late. In fact, I think the last round of guidance came out in early January related to ARPA and specifically revenue replacement calculations, just to make sure that those are recorded in the correct period on the CFA in the right place and that your compliance with the ARPA requirements is being met. And then the last item here I have is related to procurement under federal standards. Are you following the federal rules for procurement? This is especially true as you start spending ARPA money. So we're going to look at your policies related to procurement and look for any issues that we might see that could affect you even going into 2022, so we can get ahead of that. But those are the main areas of risk that we have identified. And I have just a couple other things to cover, but before I do that, I wanted to open it up to you as the Assembly Audit Committee to let me know if there's anything that you think we should add to this list, or if you have any comments on the list so far as it relates to just risks that may be in place for the 2021 audit.
Great, thank you, Ms. Mariner. I'll go ahead, pause, and see if anyone wants to get in the queue. All right, seeing no one in the queue, I will say it sounds like the list that you have put together here are items that definitely the Assembly and the administration are very much keeping on top of. So appreciate that list. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, this isn't your only opportunity. Feel free to you know, get in touch with me if you have other items that you'd like to discuss. Otherwise, we have to follow internal control procedures. We have to perform tests of compliance. We have to audit your federal schedule and your state schedule and look at your compliance with laws and regulations as well as with your grant agreements. So this is just a lot of words to say. We're doing about 12 audits in total, and there's a lot that goes into those. But your team has always been able to give us the information that we need in a timely manner. And I think last year the biggest challenge was FEMA. And I don't know that anybody could have fixed that sooner, just because of the nature of the high amount of FEMA expenditures that you were incurring during the year. Overall, in terms of timeline,
Ms. Mariner, I just want to note really quick for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Allard. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of audit timeline, we've already started the work. In fact, we're doing some interim work right now and planning procedures. And then we're really there downtown doing field work starting kind of in mid-March. We did quite a lot of internal control understanding in the last 2 weeks. And then most of the work will be done kind of in March, April, and May with the goal of submitting the financial statements by the end of June. Now, this timeline does depend on being able to get the information we need, including the draft of the financial statements themselves. There's a lot of moving pieces that go through related to the draft of the annual comprehensive financial report. That's called an ACFR now. They did change that acronym in case you've heard it called something else in the past. It's now ACFR. And the ACFR timing, we really need, a month to review the financial statements. So the timing of receiving that ACFR is draft is really important. So some of this timing may be affected by public finance, information related to cash and investments, as well as getting some of the pension information in a timely manner. Many of those things are kind of outside of your own, controller division's control. But we are working to try to get all of the component unit audits, including ACDA we're working on already, the Performing Arts Center we're working on already. AWU will happen starting in mid-March, and the port will happen in early April along with Civic. So those are kind of all the component unit ones that we're working on. Solid waste will start towards the end of March, and that one being a new audit will probably take the longest, but we do anticipate having that done by mid-May, issued in early June. So that's kind of the basic high-level timeline of the audit. We are required to maintain independence. So I'm a citizen of the municipality of Anchorage. I care a whole lot about my city and its future, but I am independent in the sense that I'm not involved in making decisions. And independence, in fact, and appearance is very important to myself and to my team. We are going to follow facts and look at supporting evidence and documentation. And it's very important that we maintain that independence. So it's important for me to tell you that, but also for you to know that we follow the AICPA independence rules. And because you have a government auditing standards audit as well, we follow the more robust independence rules for government auditing standards. So we're very careful. Your team does a great job of reaching out to us. I'll get a call sometimes about things that are complex or unusual, or how would we handle this, or do you have any recommendations of best practices? That's wonderful. And I love providing technical advice or having conversations about the best way to record transactions during the course of the year. That keeps you out of a lot of trouble, having a good back and forth relationship with us. That being said, I'm always careful that it's not my decision. It's ultimately you as the assembly and the municipality. It's your decision how things get recorded, as long as they're in line with accounting standards. That's kind of the framework that you have to follow. But it's ultimately not my decision what you do, rather to report on what was done and make sure that it's in line with the accounting standards themselves. Otherwise, I'm the lead partner. We have Michelle Kesey, who's been with us for about 12 years. I think she's only worked on your audit for a couple years. Sam Thompson, as many of you recognize Sam's name. Sam moved on to our professional practice, so he's on a national level now, still available, still part of our team, but not on the day-to-day of your audit. So Michelle Kesey is going to step in to a large extent in helping with that high level review and quality control. And then Kelly Mays, who's here with us today, is an experienced manager. She has lots of years of experience working with governments, and she'll be the day-to-day contact, and she'll be sending out the weekly email. So Kelly, maybe you can quickly unmute and introduce yourself here now.
Good afternoon. I am Kelly Mays, and I have been with BDO for the last year. And previously, I was the finance director at the city of Kodiak, and I was also in public accounting prior to then. So I'm looking forward to a great year, and it's really nice to meet all of you.
And Kelly will be sending a weekly email, and that was something that had kind of fallen off at the request of several folks, but we've added it back this year. And I know that Mr. Chairman, that's something that you had requested that we do. And so we'll be sending out an email that includes the audit committee with just a status of the audit itself. Do with it what you'd like. But if at any time you'd like to call an audit committee meeting or ask us to attend one and give you a verbal status, we're happy to do that. Also, we'll let you know in those updates if there's anything that we found that is a concern in terms of timing or identified issues or adjustments that we're discussing. Certainly that, part of that is the communication with management that happens in the background, but we want to make sure you're informed about the status and you can access your team anytime you like. We also do have a quality control reviewer in your file. So this is somebody who comes behind us, but is also involved in the planning conversations and the back-end conversations about risk and about the way we address that risk. So he's in our Las Vegas office and will be available to you as well. It's the second partner, a second person that you can reach out to if there's ever an issue. And I'll get you that information in one of our updates. Also included in here in our audit planning, we do have a few things just to kind of give you a heads up about. GASB 87 is the new statement. It came into effect technically on January 1st, I believe. And that's the new lease standard. But there's lots of other standards that have been coming into effect here over the last couple of years. They delayed some of them because of COVID. But the new statement on leases will require a pretty significant investment of time on your team. And I know they've already worked on it to get all the leases identified and recorded properly. And I've included some slides here if you want to go through them. GASB 83 and 84 have already been implemented. GASB 87, that's leases, is in effect at this point. So starting January 1, so you will not see it on the statements we're auditing now, because it will hit 2022 first, is the first year. And it essentially requires recognizing assets and liabilities for leases that haven't been previously put on the balance sheet. So if you are leasing to somebody else or you're leasing anything from somebody else, that actually goes as a right of use asset and an obligation to pay, or as a receivable and a right of allowing someone else to use it. So that's a new standard that's actually also hitting private companies. There's also some new standards related to debt, which you have already implemented. Interest incurred before the end of construction, which you've also already implemented. You don't have any significant impacts of GASB 90. And then conduit debt is now into effect for 2022. So this won't show up in 2021's audit, but it will show up in 2022. And this is just if you do issue any debt on behalf of other governments, which is not typical, but it does happen. There are some enhanced disclosures and recognition criteria for that. So the only other thing I'll kind of bring to, I have a whole bunch of other slides in here about the upcoming pronouncements, most of which I don't think will impact you too much. But just know that there is a whole public sector page on BDO's website. If you have any questions or if you want to look for industry resources, you're welcome to go there. And then we also have a COVID-19 resource center that helps you just kind of understand kind of more about what's being done. And specifically in CARES, there's a whole group of professionals with CARES and ARPA and the new Infrastructure Act that are monitoring the compliance requirements. I think Travis has already had a couple fun conversations with our specialists in that area just to make sure that he's keeping the municipality out of trouble and documenting things the right way to pass inspection if there was ever an internal inspection by a Office of Inspector General of the White House. So with that, I will open it up to any questions or concerns you may have, but I look forward to working with you this year.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Mariner. I'll go ahead and pause a second, see if anyone wants to get in the queue. All right, not seeing anyone. I did have one question, and this is a pretty standard question that I ask. So I know it's fairly early on in the process, but do you envision anything that might cause a delay in the receipt of the financial report?
So other than it being a very big year in terms of transition and the pandemic, there aren't any items I'm aware of that should delay things. There's a couple of big things that typically have to happen in order to meet that end of June deadline. The GFOA allows you to go to end of July fairly easily without any penalty, and also under your bond covenants, you've been able to do that. I know that's not your goal or your wish. But really what it comes down to for me is getting all of the different pieces and parts pulled together in time. We haven't had any issue with your team being able to do the things. Just historically, there have been some big open items that have delayed the issuance of the statement. So we have already met, and I think really starting with the issuance of last year, we already started trying to knock some of those things out. The biggest things this year being treatment of FEMA spending and where it's being tracked. Certainly the reporting of CARES and ARPA lost revenue calculations on the CFA. The main problem there is that some of that stuff is coming out really late. In fact, the ARPA guidance came out in January. After the fiscal year already ended, they were still coming out with new guidance, which is always really fun for all of us to get that so late. So barring some, external party, I don't. Now we are doing a separate audit of the solid waste services for the first year this year that we are hoping can be fairly straightforward. In the past, and I know that Travis is working diligently to prevent that, but we have had some issues getting the IT information that we need on a timely basis, and some of the information related to public finance on a timely basis. So I think, I'll just be transparent with you all, and I think those are areas that we're trying to get ahead of. And Kelly's already set up appointments with the IT folks. We're trying really hard to get those things knocked out really far on the front end. So those are not what causes any issues on the back end.
Great. Glad to hear that.
Chairman Rivera, this is Travis. Just as a point of reference for everyone on the phone and on this meeting, our bond covenant requirement states that we will publish our annual financial reports no later than September 30th. We have a 270-day window after the close of the year. Our goal is our goal we set at June 30th. We're trying to meet that. That's what we would like to do. And again, if we miss it by a couple weeks, then we miss it because of activities. But that is our objective, and that's what we're striving for.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Frisk. All right, I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue for you. Thank you so much, Ms. Mariner, for the presentation. Looking forward to getting regular updates on this.
Okay, well, thank you. Would you like us to stay on the line, or should we hop off for the rest of the meeting?
Up to you. I don't think there's going to be anything else specific for BDO for the rest of the meeting.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, so next item on our agenda is a review of Internal Audit Report 2022-01. So I'll go ahead and start with Mr. Chadwick, if you can go ahead and walk us through the report, and then turn after Mr. Chadwick to Ms. Frasca to walk us through any comments that she has. So, Mr. Chadwick.
All right, well, thank you. This report, we had 4 findings in connection with this audit, and management was responsive to all the findings and recommendations. And I'll just summarize these 4 findings real quickly. Our first finding, we found that several departments' PVR reports did not contain required performance measures or contain performance measures that were missing information, missing targets, or did not provide meaningful information. In our second finding, we found that some of the PVR reports we reviewed from selected departments were incomplete or contained various errors. In our third finding, this dealt with website usage metrics. In other words, how often were these PVR reports accessed via the web? And we found that the website usage metrics provided by the Office of Information Technology showed low viewing numbers for the PVR reports, which may indicate minimal usage of these reports by the public. For example, the PVR website received 376 unique page views for the 12-month period, September 2020 through September 2021, out of nearly 8 million unique page views for the entire municipal website. And some of those 376 unique page views, probably some of those came from our own department when we were doing the report. Our last finding, finding 4, stated that the oversight of the PVR initiative needs to be re-examined. As stated in our previous audit findings, we found problems with incomplete, meaningful, and erroneous performance measures, as well as indications of minimal use by the citizens of Anchorage. And we noted that when the PVR initiative was launched, OMB had 7 positions at that time. They now have 5 positions that can be used to work on this effort. And since the time they launched it, the municipality has been impacted the last several years, particularly OMB, with the implementation of SAP, the earthquake that we had in 2018, and as you know, the COVID-19 pandemic. So we recommended there that the OMB director should reevaluate the PVR initiative and determine how it can be adequately managed within the constraints of its current resources. And that basically summarizes the 4 findings that we had with in this report. Are there any questions, or Ms. Frasca might want to jump in at this moment too?
Yeah, thanks. Let's go ahead and go to Ms. Frasca first before we open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so what Mr. Chadwick didn't mention was the fact that I concurred with all of his recommendations. And frankly, I really appreciated the opportunity to talk with him about this initiative. I agree that the performance value results frameworks need work by the departments. And I agree on the data being reported. Some departments do a really good job. Some departments don't. And so we will be actively working with the departments to review the frameworks. And if I can back up and just sort of chat about what's included in this. And so each department has a strategic framework in which it identifies its accomplishment goals for the year or for going forward. And performance measures are the way in which we as citizens, you as assembly members, the department's managers can track how well they are achieving their goals. So it's not just really data collection for the sake of collecting data. It's really intended to be a way to identify meaningful information so that departments know and you know that they are on track in being effective in achieving what they say. So for example, one of my personal favorites, of course, is the fire department, because I know they're your favorites too. But one of their achievement goals is to improve outcome of sick, injured, trapped, and endangered victims, reduce fire damage, eliminate fire deaths and injuries, which of course we all agree is certainly the kinds of performance or accomplishment goals we would expect. And so the good information that they report is the amount of property that's been lost due to fire, how quickly they get to a fire, both of which are really critically important. Because if you said you just want to know how fast you get there, let's say they got there really fast, but 90% of structures burned to the ground, you probably wouldn't think they were very effective. And so that's why it's also important to have a performance measure of the amount of property loss. So that's an example of how this information can be meaningful, especially if, let's say, the fire department wanted to set up another station. And so the question would be, how will that impact your response time? How would you expect it to impact loss of property? And so it gives you feedback to you as a decision maker about what you're investing public dollars in terms of services. Because I think you all appreciate that our budget process really is incremental. We don't talk about the $500 million that are being spent on services. Instead, we'll spend most of the time talking about the change at the margin. We'll talk about $10 million worth of incremental changes, or maybe it's 20 million of incremental changes, but not the $500 million that's being spent. And same thing's true on our side too, on the administration side. So by having a performance framework, it's a way to evaluate the bang for the dollars being spent, bangs for the bucks. And so that's really how it's a tool. And for those very reasons, that's why we're going to actively work with the departments to improve the frameworks, make sure they're meaningful, not only to department managers, but to the mayor, so he has a tool to evaluate how well things are going. But also, I would hope the assembly might engage in a review using this kind of information. Also, if there's performance measures or information that would be meaningful to you, to your constituents, that would be helpful to us to evaluate as part of these strategic frameworks. So now I'll get off my soapbox about performance measures and just tell you that we will actively, I appreciated the audit's recommendations. We will integrate that into the work that we're going to be doing over the next several months. And I do hope we'll have another opportunity to talk with the audit committee or with the budget and finance committee or with you as individuals about performance measures and what could be meaningful to you. So there I go. I'm done.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chadwick, and thank you, Ms. Frasca. I'll go ahead and go through the queue, starting with Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chadwick and Ms. Frasca, for the overview and the feedback. I have a couple questions and a couple comments. And my first question has to do with resources and what resources are needed in order to comply, I guess, with the requirements of the performance measures. For example, I know it was noted that there's been a reduction in potential OMB staff available to help, but for the departments as well. So that's my first question, because I could imagine that with continued cuts and everything, that focusing on other immediate priorities could, also bump getting these done. And so I'm curious as to what, in your opinions, is required to comply. And then the second question, being sensitive to staffing, is, are there any graphs of long-term results available? As far as like what can be quantified, I was looking at, since we've had a lot of snow lately, the PVRs for maintenance and operations, and it would be, I think, interest to the public to see some of the trending, if possible, for some of these departments. And then just a couple quick comments. And one would be, I would say, as far as like public interest, it's interesting because this kind of thing comes up a lot at community councils in terms of my taxes are going up, what's the value of the services? And so to be able to see the accomplishments, I think, is of tremendous interest. And I think there's some also potential synergy maybe with getting feedback from community councils and maybe even some of the commissions who are engaged pretty closely with departments. But I think definitely just PVR, when I hear that, it's not super catchy in terms of, how are we doing or feedback. So it seems like there's some, really good opportunity, and definitely I'd say interest on the assembly. This comes up from time to time. I know I'm interested, and I know that I have constituents too who would be interested in having a role in the discussion. So anyway, I had those first two questions about what resources at the department level and OMB level, and then second, is there any long-term graphing of trending of some of these metrics and outcomes? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Who wants to provide comments on that?
I can, Cheryl can. Okay, first, when we review the frameworks with the departments, we'll talk to them about the resources that are required, because in theory, they're currently reporting this information. So I'm hopeful that this will not add additional burdens, and we want to make sure that the information is meaningful. So if they're collecting data that on something that's not meaningful, perhaps we can lighten their load a bit. But we'll make that kind of an assessment as we work with the departments and go through them. So I'll report back if it looks like additional resources are necessary. Historical information actually on M&O's PVR framework, their performance measures, they do have one on looking back on the amount of hours they get a major plow out completed. And you'll be able to see there's always going to be a story that can be told, but it is taking them longer. So that creates an opportunity to talk with the departments about what's changed. And but that is currently in their PVR framework. They do have a slight technical issue in that. Well, I won't get into that, but we're going to work on presentation of the information as well to make it more user friendly or more user readable. And I really appreciate your suggestions about the public's interest in this, because I feel the same way. And I had thought about how we might be able to go to the community councils and talk to them. There's certain departments that the nature of their business is something that citizens face each day, like snow plowing. How do you know when they're doing a good job? If you take the people mover, how do you know when people mover's doing a good job? And so if you ask them that kind of a question and you see what they have to say, in my mind, that becomes meaningful performance measures, because it's what citizens, it's what taxpayers care about. So in my perfect world, we'd then have a report that would give that feedback back to citizens, back to the community councils and the commissions that are involved in the nature of that specific segment's work. And so we could give them that report card, if you will. So yeah, so that's kind of how the communication piece of this, the opportunity that it might present itself, that I hope presents itself, that I'm going to work to present.
Thank you, Ms. Frasca. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. All right, so I am next in the queue. So I really appreciate that there is this work going on to improving PVRs and making them more useful for the administration, the assembly, and the public. I'm sorry that Ms. Kennedy couldn't make it today. She has brought this topic up again and again and again. But I think there is some general interest from assembly members in this discussion. So a few questions and then likely a couple final comments. So questions. Could you just walk us through your timeline for doing this work? When do you expect to have sort of a revamped PVR that's used? And then sort of if we switch up PVRs fairly dramatically, how do you imagine doing some of that trending work that Ms. LaFrance talked about between sort of the old quote unquote PVRs and the new quote unquote PVRs? If making an assumption here, but if the what you're measuring changes, then how do you envision showing a trend? Would love to explore that. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Good questions. Timeline for the work. Can I get back to you? I'm trying to work on that this week, as a matter of fact. I've been reviewing all of the department frameworks and their measures and thinking about how best to move forward. And frankly, the discussion today has been helpful in helping me think about how you view PVRs, and that helps inform what the outcome hopefully will be. So I welcome that. If I could get back to you in a written report, or we could discuss at your next meeting, whatever is appropriate, I'd be glad to do. I just don't want to jump the gun. My goal is to have something done by summer. But it's a but. And then in terms of trending data, you raise a really good point. If we change the presentation, that doesn't necessarily change the data, because what you'll see when you go to the frameworks right now, some of them, bless their hearts, they're reporting back to 2012, back when the initiative started. And so we might be able to store that information, but then just have maybe the last 5 years, something like that. But we won't erase prior year data. We'll still have access to it. And because, the joke was, at least at the state level, was, if you didn't like the data, you changed the measure. And so that's what we won't do. But we may have new measures to start out based on current events or current interests. So yeah, so we're not going to mess around with the old data, but it just may be presented in a different way.
Great, thank you, Ms. Frasca. That's very helpful. And yeah, absolutely no rush on the response. I'm just thinking, in terms of how the assembly might engage with this. And I guess just moving on, that's a good segue to my final comment. Just based on what I've heard at assembly meetings or at other committee meetings, I do think it makes sense to do this work with the broader assembly via maybe some type of work session that the assembly chair, Ms. LaFrance, can hopefully work with you to set up. And then for my perspective, after the full body gets a chance to give you whatever insights that they may have and whatever thoughts that they may have, I do think it makes sense to then switch the work to this committee, and I previewed this at a prior committee meeting to the full body, but from my perspective, I think it makes sense that this committee be sort of the home for PVRs, not only sort of in the middle of this project that you're doing to revamp PVRs, but when we actually get the reports on a quarterly basis, for this committee to be the one to review those reports. And of course, other assembly members are invited to attend this committee and be a part of that review as well. But that's, I think, a longer term discussion to have, and would be happy to hear from the rest of my colleagues and hear what they think about that. Okay, enough from me. I'll go back to Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment on what you had said about the assembly being involved, and I agree, Ms. Frasca, if you feel like a work session would be helpful at this point or a little later on, definitely we should get that on the calendar. Felix, Mr. Chair, I agree with what you said about doing work in this committee. I mean, we can also have a preliminary conversation in the Rules Committee as well. But I do think that there will be a lot of interest from members and some feedback on that. So however we can help, Ms. Frasca. Definitely easy enough to get a work session on the calendar. And I guess I just wanted to make, one comment too. I was reading, I think on page 4 about just, coming up with meaningful metrics. And having worked for many years in a field where metrics are really important, and I can really just appreciate like the example that was given about the department measured the number of inspections entered into its inspection tracking system, which is always 100%. And I heard somebody, was that you, Ms. Frasca?
Yeah, that was Cheryl.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just really can empathize with that challenge of finding meaningful metrics, because, I've been in that situation where you're looking at what you're doing and you're meeting deliverables, and those are important things, definitely internally. But then, of course, showing that value and significance to stakeholders outside the organization is also challenging too. So just empathize with that challenge. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, may I say a comment in response?
Sure.
Yeah, Ms. LaFrance, I absolutely agree about the 100% thing. But, to me, what they should be reporting is the average time it takes to issue a permit. Because if you're a civilian, if you're a citizen going there, you want to know, well, on average, how long does it usually take? Not that they, get them all done eventually. So, it's turning it around and looking at these things from what do citizens care about? And it's usually the level of service, the turnaround time. Anyway, just sort of recasting. It's not to say that they may not still report some of their activities, but what does it mean from a civilian's or a citizen's perspective? So that's where I hope we can make these more robust.
Absolutely. No, I think that your example just hits the nail on the head. As far as how quickly and the turnaround on that. And it, like I had mentioned earlier, we get a lot of feedback at community councils too from folks, because a lot of times people show up to those meetings when they're frustrated about something, or they want to voice that opinion. So no, definitely appreciate that example, and thank you, Ms. Frasca. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me jump back in.
Absolutely. All right. Any other thoughts from members of the committee? All right. And then I guess, Ms. Frasca, did you have any final thoughts you wanted to leave us with?
I just really, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, because it's something that I feel is very important for citizens to have this kind of information. So your time today is really appreciated. The opportunity about a work session in the future, I'll take you up on that as soon as we get a plan outlined, and to get your feedback. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Frasca. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to add too, and I think Ms. Frasca, you used the term opportunity. I think this is a really great opportunity to also show the public the good work that municipal employees do, and hopefully too capture some of those improvements that have been going on, and streamlining as well. So I think, yeah, there's an opportunity to show folks what, the level of value of services that the municipality provides. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, great. Well, then looking forward to continuing work with OMB on this. All right, so then moving on, we don't have any other business on our agenda. We don't have any unfinished business on our agenda. So then we have audience participation. Are there any members of the public who would like to participate? If so, it's *6 to unmute yourself, and you'll have 3 minutes. I don't think there are any members of the public here. Okay, not hearing anyone, then That is the end of our agenda. Thanks everyone for your time today. I will go ahead and adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.